Great, guys. So, indeed, for sure, many of us are actually looking forward to this conversation. I mean, I'm excited myself to really gain that first on practical experience from someone who has actually been in the infosec trenches for a number of years. I mean, someone that was actually called out in 9/11, for many of us who can recall, by the Pentagon to carry out network disaster recovery. And no doubt he would have garnered significant experience, I mean, to have been called out in such a situation. So we are talking about the likes of Bill Alderson. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Richard, really nice to join you. It's a cloudy, stormy day here in Austin. You can see here the Lady Bird Lake and the Austin skyline. If you've not been here, it's a great place to visit, and it's a great place to live as well. And they're building the Gigafactory right here in Austin. It's giant, and when you drive by it, it's just huge. So Austin's a really great place, and I'm pleased to be here. And although I am a native of California since the mid 1800s, I'm like fourth and fifth generation native Californian. But when I moved here in 2005, I was, comforted by the fact that I am still West. So here I am.
Okay, fantastic. So, Bill, for sure, one of the things that many organizations struggles with is actually putting together that plan, that disaster recovery plan. I mean, it's one thing to have your disaster recovery plan, to have it written, to have it approved, to have your team to actually carry out the various tabletop exercises. But it is a total different scenario when you actually carry out those activities on paper versus when the actual events actually take place. That is where you know whether or not those plans are actually effective. That is when you know whether or not your capabilities are actually in place to deal with the situation. So for sure, many persons are definitely looking forward to for you to really share with us, bring us through that experience of what it actually takes to deal with these situations as an organization, as an entity, from a practical perspective. Take us through those realities.
Yes. Let me add some context here. Um, the I went to a disaster recovery conference where just about 1,000 people gather once a year at the DRJ Journal Disaster Recovery Conference. It was down in Orlando. It was just a couple of weeks ago, and I was down there. And I ended up having to fly to an emergency in Ohio right before that conference. And so I went down to Orlando to the disaster recovery conference. This is where business continuity people, disaster recovery people who have decades of experience gather to discuss how to build a plan and that sort of thing. Well, the first session that I went to was actually on Sunday, and most conferences don't have a lot of content on Sunday, but I was really desirous of hearing some of these disaster recovery folks talk about this type of practical situation. And of course, I have gone into many different situations live to resolve issues, denial of service attacks, ransomware attacks, and that sort of thing, where the heaviness of the situation is upon the people and the organization. So I've become somewhat of a, well, my wife is in the psychology industry, and so she challenges me to think about things a little bit on the psychology side. What happens to people when they actually are in the thick of an actual true problem? And who are the decision makers at that particular period of time? So at the conference on that Sunday, just a couple of weeks ago, the topic was of the very first session Ransomware is a disaster. Okay, so part of the issue in the world is who is in charge when business continuity is affected, when disasters occur. So we've kind of bifurcated from the normal disaster recovery people being in charge when there is an event that affects a business. And now we have all these security people who have everyone's ear, and a lot of energy is going about because the cost of these cyber events is so high and the impact is so high. So I was really glad to go into this situation, and the first thing I started hearing is that ransomware is a disaster. Well, Richie, don't you think that it is a disaster? What are your thoughts on that? Don't you think that, you know, a cyber event or a ransomware that is affecting the business, isn't that truly like a hurricane just took down the building?
Exactly. When you think about the impact of it, and many organizations that have actually heard about, there are many situations, and we see the impact that especially from a financial perspective, also on the lives of many persons. I mean, an organization being affected. There are cases where persons might end up losing their jobs, and that in itself also has a chain of reaction. So it goes beyond just an organization or a business being affected. So for sure,
Yeah.
yes.
So along with that, we have kind of abandoned the true disaster recovery professional. When I started in IT and that sort of thing, I was working with IBM mainframes, digital mini computers, large systems, and that sort of thing. And the world has kind of, to some degree, abandoned those philosophies, even though the mainframe is a very vital capability today, much more reliable than our computer networks. And I've written a white paper about how did we get where we are today. We end up, thinking that we are building a utopia with PCs and networks and servers and network intrinsic applications like, Salesforce and other such things. We think we're building this utopia, and in actuality, we've built ourselves right into a everyday crisis with these technologies that really have not stabilized. Now, it's good that we're going through and growing, just like we're going through and growing in the security area. We're growing, things are getting better. But today, people are really looking at and focusing on detection and response. And I'm going to let that pause there. Everyone is focused on detection and response. Why? Because when you are doing detection, you're finding a hacker that got in, right? That's detection. Is that not detection?
Yes, it
What
is.
do you? So we're basically spending all of our time, energy, and money on detecting something that we don't want to happen.
Exactly.
And when it happens, it's kind of like too late to be preventative. So I like to say in my industry, and what I try to promulgate through, understanding and education, is that it's always better to be ready. And sadly, most organizations are not ready. So they buy detection and response, and we are spending an inordinate amount of money on detection and response. So what happens when you get a ransomware? What happens when you get compromised? Well, it's kind of like, it's that ship has sailed. The data's gone. You're now negotiating with terrorists essentially to have them help you, right? And it's just negotiating the price, right? You know, what's the difference between a high-priced prostitute and a low-priced prostitute? Well, you know, you've heard the old adage when the guy goes and says, well, you know, you're a working woman. And she says, what do you mean? And it's like, well, if I gave you $1 million, would you sleep with me? And she says, well, yeah. And, you know, and then the price keeps going down, you know, they keep negotiating. And it's like, it gets down to $100. And she says, well, what do you think I am? You know, a 2-bit? Well, it's like, we already established, you know, you're going to do this for that. And so we're negotiating and we're working with these people, and we are hiring people to negotiate with these people to help us, right? And in the news yesterday, today, males are very subject to the wiles of women, starting with Samson and Delilah. And, you know, I mean, it just goes on and on. It is inbred, sadly, in our culture that men do these terrible things, and then we pay the consequences of them. And, you know, sadly, in security, we are paying the consequences of not being prepared, truly not being prepared. We are hiring people in executive positions over technology who don't know a bit from a byte. And then we expect that we're going to get the best solutions out of those. Well, I feel like we ought to be promoting scientists into management roles above technology, not putting, you know, managerial leaders, because managers like managers, and they think they can buy technologists. Well, I'll just tell you, good technologists are not for sale. You can't find them today. And the management has done this because everybody now, you know, they want to be in leadership. They want to be in management. We need to respect the technologists, and we need to promote technologists into scientific positions of leadership where they can truly do some improvements. Because when you put untechnical leaders into those positions, you are just asking for it. So if you get into a situation where you have a compromise or a ransomware or something of that nature, you know, and the managers are all around there trying to get status constantly and that sort of thing, and really impacting the ability to solve the problem many times. But, you know, we do have to work together, and we are changing. But here's the thing. When you get hit by ransomware, the first thing that happens is your data's gone. You don't know what happened. You don't know what hooks they put into your system. So number one is if you do not have a good backup strategy. Well, what does backup strategy mean? Well, I've got all my data backed up. But do you have your operating system backed up? Do you have the image of your operating system? Because I'm telling you, you cannot extricate, you cannot get those hackers out of a system that has been compromised. They have bombs in there ready to go, and every 2 years you're going to get another ransomware because they were successful once. They plant something in there that's quiet, and then they wait 2 years, and then they do it to you again. Almost everyone that I look at these days who I've helped, you know, solve, I say, look, you either have to completely rebuild every single server, every single one, or, you know, you need to start from scratch, zero. It's not just about the data, it's about the operating systems that they infiltrate. The directory services, the programs, that sort of thing are compromised. So if you trust this person that you're negotiating with to eradicate your servers and to decrypt your systems, you know, I've got news for you. You are dealing with criminals. and criminals, are going to reoffend. And so there's nothing you can do. You either rebuild all those servers. So the number one thing that I'm going to tell you that you need to do is you need to image the servers incrementally, and you need to store those where if the system or your network is compromised, those images cannot be gotten to. And you need multiple copies of those, because you may find out 4 months ago you got compromised and they've been living and have already modified your OSs to have all of the hooks for the next ransomware event. So you need to have a continual iterative backup, not just of your data, but of your operating system in order to successfully recover from a cyber incident. And you need to look at your cyber incident as a disaster recovery event and business continuity event. Those people in those career paths have been doing this for the last 50 plus years. Security people, I mean, the first firewall was what? Basically firewalls really started being, popular in the late 80s, early 90s. That's not very long ago. Well, mainframe people have been working on business continuity and disaster recovery since the very beginning of time, or the beginning of technology. So we need to take a look at and integrate, security incidents with disaster recovery and business continuity. Because those people know how to go about planning for, exercising, and getting disaster recovery into the program. So you get compromised. Now you're depending upon this criminal to decrypt your stuff and to clean your system up. Really? So we are spending all of our money on DNR, detection and response. And I'm telling you that the best recovery option is to be prepared well prior to an event occurring. And most people, frankly, are not. So there is a lack of integrity on the part of most participants and companies, and they just basically lie about their preparedness. They're not prepared. They don't have full image backups of their systems incrementally over time, nor do they have even data backups. And a lot of times their data backups are subject to being compromised by the hackers that get into the system. In other words, they back up to something that's in their environment, and then when the hackers get in, they corrupt your backups as well, right? And that's just not the way that we want to do things. So the best defense is a good offense, or a good preparedness. And part of that is when you depend upon clickologists. And I may offend a few people here, but clickologists are those people who know how to buy product, click on it to install, okay, operate it, but they do not know how it works intimately, and they can't reverse engineer it. They can't figure out how everything is working so that they can know where they are subject to openings. And they're more and more dependent on their vendors for products that they click on, and so they become clickologists. I promote understanding the fundamentals of network and server technology. If you don't understand the fundamentals and you're only certified in one brand, you're not a technologist, you're a clickologist. When you start looking and thinking in theory and getting your neural networks working on understanding how everything works, and then evaluating because you've diagrammed it out, and that's the first step in disaster recovery. If you don't diagram out your networks and systems so that you can see where you're open, you cannot hope to plan to be able to recover, and you certainly can't defend. And most of the time, I find that people do not have accurate diagrams of their environment, flow diagrams of their systems, their applications, and nor do they know the dependencies that their systems have that you have to recreate in the event of a compromise where you've lost one part of your system. The other part of the equation is that now that we all work at home, or predominantly, our own homes are subject now to the security umbrella has to go not only to the data center, the colo, the clouds, but it also needs to extend to your workers at home, because when they get compromised, you get compromised. And so the disaster recovery planning and that sort of thing has to extend out and have that umbrella cover your home workers. I mean, a very simple thing. Do your home workers even have a UPS? Well, only if they bought it themselves. Well, that's not a good plan. You know, the people that you depend upon to help you recover from a cyber event are working at home, and if they don't have a UPS and something happened, you know, you're out. So companies need to consider hardening the home systems and perhaps even providing a company computer for them to use when they're at home. So they're not using their personal computers that can be easily compromised by a number of different things, not to mention your 13-year-old who's on some network using a computer that you use for business. It's like not a good thing. So you know, backup is incredibly important. And backing up, like I said, of those systems, the operating system is number one, because you're just going to be repeating the same problem again. The other part of the equation that is incredibly important, and Richie, if you want to ask me some questions or interrupt, go ahead. I'm happy to do it.
Sure, definitely. One of the questions I was just about to ask is that, based on all that you have just made mention of, having being aware of your network documentation is very crucial. And for many persons, they might not see that initially, and they might just be thinking about having that documentation in terms of who it is to call, what persons to get to. But what do companies do or organizations do who might not have that capability to actually respond and to deal with the actual events of a ransomware attack? Where do they actually start in terms of, based on your experience, based on the biggest challenges you have actually faced so far with organizations who have actually gone through these sort of situations?
So reverse engineering how the hackers got in is key, right? Because if you know how they got in, you can prevent it in the future. Okay. And if you don't have a diagram of your system, you know, you're starting out at a deficit. And having a diagram is incredibly important. When I arrived at Pentagon, right immediately following 9/11, we were escorted in. The building was still smoldering. Got into the war room. They started telling us what the problems were. And the first thing I did is I said, well, you know, let's get the network diagrams out so that we can kind of put our finger on things and see where things need to be adjusted. And they said, well, sadly, we don't have any diagrams because we were all automated and all of our diagrams were online and the aircraft hit that server. So we have no diagrams because we are so important, and we just did everything online. We're very advanced, but the aircraft hit that server, gone. They didn't print out those diagrams. Really? They did not print out the diagrams. So now we had to reverse engineer, log in, trace route, like somebody mentioned there, looking at all these different things and reverse engineering when we should be responding, we're reverse engineering. Okay. And so it's important to have those diagrams. And if you don't have those diagrams, you should have them. And having a diagram doesn't mean you go buy NetBrain. Having a diagram does not mean that you go buy NetBrain. Because I have met so many customers, they go out and they buy the Clickology tools. And so they think that they are safe because, well, we bought NetBrain and we turned it on. Well, you have to do a lot more. NetBrain's a nice tool, but somebody has to architect, somebody has to print out, somebody has to train everyone in the dependencies and the architecture that you learn from something like NetBrain so that you can actually, get some use out of it. So just buying products, and this is the problem. You put non-technical people in charge, CFOs and that sort of thing. And what happens? Oh, well, we can just buy. No, you cannot buy. You cannot buy goodwill from your technologists. You cannot buy good technology. You just can't. It's something that is cultivated. It's part of your culture. And one of the biggest problems is, I'll just tell you, people don't think technologists are that important because we can just buy them. You cannot buy goodwill. You need to cultivate mutual respect of technology and management and work together at solving this problem. And so you can't belittle your technologist because you're a manager. Managers love managers and they think they're all, that they deserve $12 million a year or $100 million a year. Well, I got news for you. At the time that it's important, that technologist is worth more than you are. So you need to cultivate a caring environment to make certain that people have mutual respect, dignity in the workplace. And
one
so, go
of the
ahead.
questions is that you are in an environment, let's say you have all of your servers, your configurations, they're all backed up, they're all image. So the question is, how do you know that within those backups, you do not have various backdoors, tools waiting to detonate within the network? Is there some mechanism that you can actually have in place that evaluates the content of that backup to ensure that it is actually safe?
Well, I think that the best way to cover that is to just make sure that you save them incrementally at some frequency. I don't know. For some people, it may be daily. For some people, it may be hourly. For others, it could be monthly. But you need to be able to get back to a place that you can begin to build. Reverse engineering the the disaster or how they got in is important, but most people are wrong about it. They think, oh, it's this or oh, it's that, and very rarely is it actually what they proposed it is or thought. It's very difficult. The ransomware folks, get in via, one of their favorite ways is RDP, or SSH or that sort of thing. So, preventing or not having the ability to recover your configuration is, in my opinion, the biggest problem that you're facing. We can deal with lost data. It's painful, but we can deal with getting it decrypted or getting it from backups. But if you keep the operating system configuration that you had prior to the event and allow the hackers to clean it up for you, you're just waiting. It's just going to happen again. But you do need to have tools. Now, that's the other part of the equation, is that every organization that has, more than 50 people in the IT organization, absolutely unequivocally, one of those people needs to be a critical problem resolution, deep packet inspection analyst, so that you can reverse engineer, you can analyze these things and look at 0 days, not just what your software detects. Okay. So it's a multiplicity of things. But in my opinion, the biggest solution to disaster and recovery of a cyber attack is preventing it. And unfortunately, people have been spending over the last several years, millions and billions of dollars on DNR, detect and respond. When you have to detect, you have already lost. And we're so engaged with DNR because we can say, look, we had a hack. Okay, now we're responding. So management says, oh, good job. Pat yourself on the back. You detected it and you responded. And maybe you minimalized the impact. But what would happen if you prevented it? How do you know if you prevented it? And that's the part of the equation right now that people aren't really looking at. So we're not looking at prevention. We're looking at DNR, and we're spending inordinate amounts of money on DNR, and we are not doing best practices on backups. We're not doing best practices in being able to detect a 0-day event because we don't have technologists that are skilled in deep packet inspection. And we're not looking at the lessons learned in the environment and then applying best practices to mitigate those lessons learned. And it all revolves around just good discipline and having good skills and building out those skills. And one of the problems with skill building is that we're not respecting the deep packet inspection people anymore. People who can indeed diagnose and solve the problems. We are so happy that we have all these clickologists and plugologists. Well, don't be a clickologist and plugologist. Be a scientist. Understand the theory of what's happening so you can understand how they got in, why they got in, and then you can close those holes. But do it in a preventative way, so before DNR is there. But the DNR is lessons learned, right? So at the conference that I was at just a couple of weeks ago with about 1,000 people from the top companies in the world, they are determining that ransomware is a disaster and we need the disaster recovery professionals to work with the security people to help them build in plans and mechanisms to have business continuity and to have good programs and systems and documentation and that sort of thing to be able to respond and managerially and technically to these type of problems.
But in many cases, persons might say that um, connected equals to being hacked. So how do you actually draw that line between security in terms of being connected to the internet and being able to deliver the necessary service? So that is why in many cases, many organizations spend a lot of resources in terms of their ability to detect and respond versus preventing. I mean, in many cases, preventing is also a narrow line between the business functionality and not so much on security, because the fact is that you can have too much security that can actually interferes with the productivity of the organization. So I think that is where a lot of the challenge lies for many businesses in terms of making that compromise functionality versus security. So many persons go on the side of um, being able to quickly detect and respond rather than preventing the business from actually operating. So how the business is actually operate in light of these various risks or situation?
So I made mention that before I went to the disaster recovery conference, I got called away to an emergency for a Fortune 150 company. The company had an application that was running in 50 different data centers. And they would log in to this application that helped them manage all their 50 data centers. And it took 1 to 3 minutes to log in to this application. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And they had been working on it for about 3 months, spent about $250,000 in time, energy, money, and and problems, could not solve this problem. So they called me and said, Bill, can you just fly up here and take a look? So I got there, and sure enough, the application took 1 to 3 minutes. So we had gotten everybody on the conference call, right? You got 20 people on the conference call, probably about $10,000 to $15,000 an hour in time, right, on the conference call, trying to diagnose why logging into this application that was critical to operating these data centers was taking 1 to 3 minutes. And they were gonna throw the application out to the curb, which was highly impactful because that's how they run and bill for their data center operations. So I went in, and if you go to a colo, a big data center, the first thing you do is you come in through security, and it looks like Fort Knox, all that sort of stuff. You get in, you finally, get in, and you're in the conference room, and they say, okay, well, we're going to show you this application and how slow it is. And I say, great. So they pop out over a laptop in the conference room, and they connect to the server, and sure enough, it took 1 to 3 minutes. Well, I had a deep packet analyzer, so I sniffed it, right? I looked at every packet transaction between the two. And sure enough, there were packet delays of up to 500 milliseconds. So, the network guys get on there, and they say, well, I think that it's the firewall, that's causing all of these delays, and that's what the network guy thought, right? And so he asserted that it's the firewall. So the security people came in the next day to work on it. But I said, well, before we bring in the security people and that sort of thing, let's go upstairs in the data center into the 10 by 30 cage where the $7 million worth of Dell servers and $5 million application is running in that cage. And then they serve out that information from that application to other 50 data centers. And so I said, let's, plug this same laptop that you have into their network. Well, of course, they had just finished upgrading this brand new server build from 10 gig to 40 gig, thinking that was going to solve their 1 to 3 minute login, right? And so it didn't solve their problem necessarily. So they're really having a problem. So the next thing we do is I say, look, let's run it on the same network inside the cage right next to the application servers. 10 seconds. I said, is 10 seconds a good time for you? Yeah, if we could get 10 seconds, that would be great. So I went back downstairs to the conference room, and we ran it again, 1 to 3 minutes. So I said, well, there's something between this conference room and 150 feet away upstairs where the servers are located. I said, I need the diagrams of every component and system between here and that cage with that $12 million application. And they said, okay, well, we'll have that for you tomorrow. It's getting close to the end of the day. So little bit did I know, but the network staff, the CTO, all Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses and all the king's men stayed up all night. 3 to 4 a.m. 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 to diagnose. What I told them originally when I first got there, I said, man, you know, I'd like to look at your infrastructure because I'd like to see how your spanning tree is working. You have duplicates of everything, right? You have redundant circuits, you have redundant firewalls, you have redundant servers, you have redundant routers, you have redundant switches. Everything's redundant, right? Yeah, we've paid twice or three times for all of our components in this multi-million-dollar data center, of which we have 50 of these designed identically. So they stayed up all night, troubleshot. They didn't want me to see it, right? Because I'm the hired gun who comes in to look and to hold people accountable and to definitively know if and wells or buts, provide the evidence that they cannot ignore. And I can present it to executive management and they can't hide behind BS and they can't blame it on Cisco, blame it on somebody, blame it on these guys. You know, there's no blaming. I figure it out definitively with deep packet inspection step by step. So I told him, I said, you've got these problems here and we need to find out where it is between the two locations, 150 feet away and down here. And so they stayed up all night. The next morning I come in, I say, okay, well, where's the diagrams, blah, blah, blah. And they said, oh, well, we found some problems last night. Secret analysis, not allowing other people to see what they're doing or why they're doing it or how they're doing it. Why? Because they're hiding. They're covering their arses. Okay. So what happens? They said, well, we found some loops in our technology. And I said, yeah, I bet. When loops are inside your core network, they consume bandwidth to the least common denominator of the link speeds that are between and involved in the loop. So if you have a 10 gig loop, it's looping and it's consuming all 10 megabits, all of it. If you have a loop between switches or routers, that is going to consume 100% of whatever the link speeds are of that loop, whether it's spanning tree, you know, or an F5 layer 3 loop, because F5 does some special stuff that causes layer 3 loops. And so they said, yeah, well, we removed the loop. And I said, okay, well, how'd you remove the loops? Well, they wouldn't tell me how they removed the loops because I know how they removed the loops. I said, do you have spanning tree? No, we don't like spanning tree. Well, spanning tree is hard to understand. And it's also hard to predict what links it's going to block and how it works. So they said, yeah, we don't like spanning tree. It causes us all sorts of problems. And I said, yeah, but it's the only thing that'll allow you to have active standby or active. And if something breaks, it will automatically heal. And it will allow the redundant equipment that you purchase to actually act redundantly in automated state. But you have to know how to.
I have a question for you. Someone has a question on screen saying sniffing packets is able to tell, I think they're asking whether or not sniffing, you're able to tell whether the firewall is compromised by sniffing packets.
Absolutely. Because you can see what SSH sessions are going on to it. And then you can, you know, and now the other part of the equation is that if you're a good deep packet inspection analyst, you know how to take the certificates that are being used to log in with SSH or SSL, and you take those certificates and you pull them out of your private server and you put them into your analyzer, and then you can decrypt what's going on, and then you can actually see what the hackers are saying. Because you own those servers, you own that firewall, you own the certificate that it's using to encrypt for SSH or SSL, you own those. Well, put them into your analyzer and now you can see what they're typing on the screen. Now you know what they're doing inside there. And if you have the ability to capture those things, you can indeed find out what they're doing and know that it's not coming from people that you like and that sort of thing. So But let me get back to my disaster that I just responded to a couple of weeks ago. Multi-billion-dollar company, Fortune 150 company, okay? And they are 3 months into this, they get this application, and then their team, after I diagnose what the problem is, which is, something's terribly wrong, let's get the diagram. Well, they stayed up all night in order to hide their analysis. And I know what they did was they most likely turned off the redundant circuit so it wouldn't loop. But what does that mean? That means that all the double and triple money that they spent to have redundant systems are no longer there, protecting them. If that single point of failure breaks in the middle of the night, it's going to be down until somebody manually turns that link back on. And so failure to engineer properly the spanning tree loop or even a layer 3 loop is going to, so basically the next morning they said, yeah, we did this, we found these things, we removed the loops, try it again. So I tried it again from the same conference room, 150 feet away, 10-second login. Yippee yay yay. Okay, now they got me off of their back, didn't they? I'm no longer peering in. In my report, one of the things that I told the executives is make certain that you did not turn off your redundancy in order to stop the loops, because your team didn't engineer a loop-free environment using spanning tree or other automated methods and turned it off and to resolve the problem. But now you have 50 data centers with single points of failure in your core network. These problems happen. How smart do you think and how experienced do you think that CTO and all the security people at that organization that has 50 data centers that serves most North American people in one way or another, why couldn't they diagnose these problems themselves? Well, they didn't have self-consciousness because they never ate their own dog food and had their own applications until they had this application that they had to put in, and it went through their infrastructure and it had such poor performance. And so they were big and had a lot of money. So all they did was point the finger back at the application people, okay, and say, we're going to get your application back out of here because, it's slow. Well, we don't have any of those problems with our other customers, and we validated, verified. So now we found that this data center, and all of them are designed similarly, had these loops in their core network and were impacting things. Of course, they blame it on security. This is a network problem, not a security problem. But this is kind of indicative of the way that our world is working. We have people who are getting $250,000, $350,000 salaries at the biggest organizations, certified. I don't care if they went to Yale, Princeton, and Harvard and everything else. They're incompetent. And they don't have self-consciousness to where they think about they are causing the very problem that they're pointing the finger at someone else about. And this is indicative of security and everything else. So one of the things that you need to do if you're a technologist, learn how to use Wireshark and sniffing. Be a theorist, not a clickologist or a plugologist. Anyone can buy stuff and plug it in. An imbecile can buy things with money, plug it in, and click and install it. It takes a true technologist to diagnose ransomware, to diagnose denial of service, to diagnose those things. You have to have high technology skills. And you can learn how to use a sniffer in a few weeks if you really focus on it. But they don't respect that anymore. And so people don't do that. And they're all talking about all of these buzzwords of product A and product B and product C. And unfortunately, they're not true technologists. They're not theorists. So focus on being a theorist. That is going to be able to serve your organization very well. and you can get to the bottom and the root cause of problems that that you'll love. If you want to know about more of these things, go to cogent.community. No .com, no .net, cogent.community. I have
Great.
disaster recovery, root cause analysis. I have problems. I have my podcast of Disaster Stream. I have all sorts of networking with security companies and that sort of thing on cogent.community. You want to learn how to sniff? I have experts in sniffing who offer free courses. There's all sorts of resources on cogent.community. And one of the things that we need to do is get your broadcast onto that environment as well. I'd love to have your podcast as one of our podcasts in cogent.community. It's a brand new community that I just created about a month ago. You're going to love it. Log in with your LinkedIn credentials and it'll populate automatically. It's awesome. Anyway,
Awesome.
That's how I'm giving back. I'm taking all of my lessons learned and I'm putting it into cogent.community, talking about it, talking with Rich, basically trying to help the world stop the dysfunction of ignorance in technical people and in leadership to basically let's go solve the problem. Let's prevent, because hackers, you are not that smart. You don't have 40 years of protocol expertise. You don't know until you got the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI, and all those guys building tools that they lost, and then you got them in your hands, and so now you use them to, create these ransomwares and that sort of thing. Yeah, you still are not that smart, and I challenge you. You cannot forever. We're gonna win.
Definitely, for sure. Let's just keep fighting. I think one of the main questions, one of the last questions I have for you, that persons definitely are asking is for you to just give us a quick summary of for example, what would be your approach, your strategy in terms of for example, if you should assemble a team and have a plan to actually deal with ransomware or any disaster, what would be that quick last words in terms of that summary?
So that would be a tiger team, or some people call it SWAT team, tiger team. That's what I typically get called in to lead the tiger team. So I assemble a group of people who, number one, have access to network documentation. Number two, they have access to all the various tools. Number three, there's somebody on the team or multiple team members who know how to do deep packet analysis. And then people who are of a nature of having self-conscience. They understand the morality of truly solving a problem, and they become honest instead of hiding. In America, people hide, they hide their guilt as much as they can. In some cultures, they say, hey, I'm guilty. Let's go solve this problem. And then they grow and grow on it. But if you don't have the integrity to say, yeah, we have this problem. So you want to assemble a group of people who have requisite skills in the technologies and systems that you have, but always look for performance-oriented people, not qualification-oriented. Performance-oriented people produce results because they care. Qualification-oriented people have 20 certifications, but they can't work their way out of a wet paper bag. Be performance-oriented. Solve the problems definitively. Diagnose, diagram, and work yourself out of a job. That's what I tell people. That's what I've always tried to do, is help other people learn how to do these things so that when disaster strikes, you have a good plan, you're executing it, and then you need to train on that. You need to assemble those people, say, hey, we just got hit with a ransomware. Let's go through the role. Let's go through the stuff. Let's use all of our tools. And then sometimes in a disaster, you've lost some of the very people that you need to help you recover. because their home system got compromised. So the top level engineer who helps you recover from ransomware, his own system got compromised. So he's out. He can't solve the problem, or she can't solve the problem, or they can't solve the problem. So that's basically what I espouse, that, be smart and be respectful and allow dignity of your technologist and build that expert capability from within your organization. It doesn't take that long. But you got to focus on it, and you have to have that as a motivational ideal to be able to troubleshoot things definitively and reverse engineer. It's not about clickology. It's not about some product that you click on. It's about understanding what's happening, seeing what's going on. That's the practical part of being able to truly respond and make a difference in your environment.
Well, this was an awesome conversation, and definitely for sure you actually gave us that insight, that perspective in terms of actually recognizing that ransomware incidents, these things are a reality. So actually having the team, the capabilities, the plan, you have actually shared a number of insightful things that need to be taken into consideration, that no doubt persons who are actually tuning in will definitely be taking back these pointers to the organizations to help to make them more resilient in light of these various attacks. So it was indeed a great conversation, and for sure we look forward to many more like these for the community as well.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing to help the community. Rising tides raise all boats. We just all need to work together with good conscience, and be sensitive. And always remember, when there's a problem out there, or performance or what have you, hey, the first thing that you do as a person of conscience is you say, it might be something I did. It might be me. And unfortunately, in America, people are always pointing fingers somewhere else, and it's just non-productive. So really appreciate everybody online. Let's work together, and we'll work to eradicate these criminals out of our networks and systems. It is possible. We are going to do it, and it's really incrementally, step by step, adhering to good best practices, applying lessons learned, and building out what we know we should do as the most morally correct thing. So really appreciate you, and love being on your program now a couple of times. And anytime you want to meet in, I'm always willing to give my 2 cents worth. And I tell people, take my 2 cents worth. Didn't cost you much. Make a profit.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on. And I too definitely enjoy having those conversations. I mean, to have you on, always willing to share. So definitely, I, along with the community, definitely value your input. So, guys, that's a wrap from us. Stay tuned for future conversations like this.